The manila folder landed on Frances Oldham Kelsey's desk on a September morning in 1960, unremarkable among the stacks of pharmaceutical applications requiring review. Inside lay Richardson Merrill's request to market Kevidon, a sedative already selling briskly across Europe under the name Thalidomide. The company expected routine approval within 60 days. They had invested millions in marketing campaigns, printed promotional materials, and lined up distribution networks across America. What they couldn't have known was that the unassuming 46-year-old medical officer reviewing their application, just 1 month into her FDA career, possessed both the scientific expertise and the moral courage to stand between their commercial ambitions and a generation of American children. The collision between corporate pressure and scientific integrity was about to begin. Frances Kathleen Oldham entered the world on the 24th of July, 1914, in a modest home on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Her father worked as a military officer, her mother as an educator, and both instilled in young Frances an appreciation for rigorous thinking and intellectual curiosity. The forests and coastlines of Vancouver Island provided a childhood backdrop of natural beauty, but Frances's interests turned inward, toward books and scientific observation rather than outdoor adventure. Her academic talents emerged early. At McGill University in Montreal, Frances excelled in her undergraduate studies, graduating with honors in 1934. Her professors recognized something unusual in this quiet, methodical student, a combination of analytical precision and stubborn independence that would define her career. When she applied to graduate programs in pharmacology, a field dominated almost entirely by men, McGill's faculty encouraged her to aim for the best programs in North America. The University of Chicago's pharmacology department received an application from F. Oldham in 1936. Assuming the applicant was male, they offered admission immediately. Frances arrived in Chicago to discover the mistake. But by then the acceptance stood. Her advisor, Professor Eugene Gehling, proved remarkably progressive for the era, judging students by their scientific abilities rather than their gender. Gehling's laboratory was investigating a medical mystery that would prove tragically prophetic. In 1937, over 100 Americans died after taking Elixir Sulfanilamide, a liquid antibiotic containing diethylene glycol as a solvent. The toxic ingredient caused kidney failure across multiple states before authorities identified the problem. Frances joined Gehling's team studying how the body processed the poison, learning crucial lessons about drug metabolism and the dangers of assuming pharmaceutical safety without rigorous testing. This early research shaped Frances's entire approach to drug evaluation. She learned that substances considered safe could become lethal depending on formulation, that the body's processing of drugs involved complex chemistry often poorly understood, and that pharmaceutical companies couldn't always be trusted to conduct thorough safety testing. These lessons would resurface decades later when she reviewed another drug marketed as completely safe. Frances earned her Ph.D. in pharmacology in 1938, then made the unusual decision to pursue a medical degree as well. She understood that evaluating drugs for human use required both deep scientific knowledge and clinical understanding. While completing her M.D., she met Fremont Ellis Kelsey, a fellow pharmacology student. They married in 1943, forming both a personal and professional partnership that would last decades. The Kelseys worked together on research projects, published papers jointly, and spent evenings discussing pharmacological theories over dinner. Fremont respected Frances's intellect completely, never suggesting that her career should be secondary to his. When Frances joined the FDA in 1960, Fremont would become her closest advisor, reviewing data and strengthening her resolve during the battles ahead. In 1953, chemists at Chemie Gr. Feinthal, a small pharmaceutical company in West Germany, synthesized a new compound in their laboratory. The substance, later named thalidomide, showed promise as a sedative during initial testing. Unlike barbiturates, which could be lethal in overdose, thalidomide appeared remarkably safe. Rats given massive doses suffered no apparent harm. The company rushed the drug toward market, convinced they had discovered a commercial goldmine. Gr. Fainenthal's marketing campaign portrayed thalidomide as revolutionary. Advertisements showed a child reaching for a bottle of pills with text assuring parents that even accidental ingestion couldn't harm their children. The drug was marketed as safe for everyone, including pregnant women, the elderly, and people with heart conditions. Sales representatives told doctors that thalidomide overdose was impossible, that it carried none of the addiction risks associated with other sedatives. The timing proved perfect for commercial success. Post-war Europe was experiencing economic recovery and expanding healthcare access. Pharmaceutical companies were discovering lucrative markets in lifestyle medications, drugs that treated everyday complaints rather than life-threatening diseases. Sedatives and tranquilizers became particularly popular as modern life's stresses drove demand for chemical relief. Thalidomide sold spectacularly. By 1960, it was available in 46 countries under various brand names, including Contergan in Germany, Distaval in Britain, and Kevedon for the planned American market. In West Germany alone, Gr. Fainenthal sold approximately 1 ton of thalidomide monthly. The drug could be purchased over the counter in many countries, requiring no prescription or medical supervision. Millions of people took thalidomide for insomnia, anxiety, and stress. Pregnant women became a particularly important market. Morning sickness affected most pregnancies, creating demand for safe anti-nausea medication. Doctors, assured by pharmaceutical representatives that thalidomide posed no risks, prescribed it liberally to expectant mothers. The drug indeed controlled nausea effectively, and women reported feeling better while taking it. Sales to pregnant women climbed steadily across Europe and beyond. Richardson, Morel, an American pharmaceutical company based in Cincinnati, secured licensing rights to sell thalidomide in the United States. Company executives viewed the drug as a major profit opportunity. Sleeping pills represented one of the largest pharmaceutical markets in America, and a sedative marketed as completely safe could capture significant market share from existing products. The company invested heavily in preparation for American launch. They printed promotional materials, hired additional sales representatives, and distributed thousands of free samples to doctors. Marketing campaigns were designed to emphasize thalidomide's safety profile, particularly for use by pregnant women experiencing morning sickness. Richardson Merrill projected enormous sales once FDA approval came through. Nobody questioned whether a drug this safe could actually exist. The prevailing attitude in pharmaceutical circles held that if a substance showed no toxicity in animal testing and people tolerated it well, regulatory approval should be straightforward. The FDA was seen as a bureaucratic formality rather than a meaningful safety barrier. Companies expected quick reviews and routine approvals for products already succeeding internationally. Frances Kelsey settled into her new office at the FDA in August 1960, surrounded by file cabinets and stacks of pharmaceutical applications awaiting review. Her supervisor assigned her the thalidomide application almost immediately, likely assuming this internationally successful drug would provide an easy first case for the new medical officer. The Richardson-Merrell submission looked professional and comprehensive, filled with data from European studies and testimonials from satisfied physicians. Kelsey began reading methodically, page by page, making notes in the margins. Her training under Geiling had taught her to approach drug applications with skepticism, searching not for reasons to approve but for gaps. In evidence, the thalidomide application revealed problems quickly. Animal studies were limited and poorly designed. Chronic toxicity data was essentially absent. The company claimed the drug was safe for extended use, but submitted no long-term studies supporting that assertion. More concerning were scattered reports in British medical journals describing peripheral neuritis in patients taking thalidomide regularly. Peripheral neuritis meant nerve damage in the extremities, causing tingling, numbness, and sometimes lasting disability. Richardson-Merrell's application mentioned these reports briefly, but dismissed them as minor and unrelated to the drug. Kelsey found this explanation inadequate. If thalidomide could damage peripheral nerves, what else might it affect? Why would nerve damage be unrelated to a drug acting on the nervous system? Her earlier research on drug metabolism came rushing back. During her work on the sulfanilamide disaster, Kelsey had learned that the body processes drugs through complex chemical pathways, creating metabolites that sometimes prove more toxic than the original compound. Thalidomide's metabolic pathways were poorly understood. The application provided virtually no data on how the human body broke down and eliminated the drug. Kelsey drafted her first rejection letter on the 10th of November 1960, just 2 months after receiving the application. The letter detailed specific deficiencies, requiring additional data before approval could be considered. She needed proper chronic toxicity studies, better documentation of the peripheral neuritis cases, and thorough analysis of thalidomide's absorption and metabolism. Her tone remained professionally neutral, simply requesting the information necessary for adequate safety evaluation. Richardson, Merrill's response reflected shock and frustration. Their representatives called Kelsey's office, asking why she was delaying approval for a drug already used safely by millions worldwide. They submitted additional materials intended to address her concerns, but Kelsey found the new data inadequate. The company was providing testimonials and marketing materials rather than rigorous scientific studies. What Richardson Merrill didn't understand was that Kelsey's earlier sulfanilamide research had made her particularly sensitive to assumptions about placental barriers. Many doctors believed the placenta protected fetuses from most drugs circulating in maternal blood. Kelsey knew better. Her research had shown that various substances cross the placental barrier readily, exposing developing fetuses to drugs their mothers consumed. When pharmaceutical companies claimed their products were safe for pregnant women, Kelsey demanded proof, not assumptions. The phone calls began shortly after Kelsey's second rejection letter in January 1961. Richardson Merrill representatives, initially cordial and professional, grew increasingly aggressive. They questioned her qualifications, suggested she didn't understand modern pharmacology, and implied that her inexperience was causing unnecessary delays. The company had already spent substantial money preparing for American launch. Every month without approval represented significant financial losses. Company representatives visited Kelsey's office repeatedly, armed with additional materials and increasingly pointed arguments. Why was she blocking a drug used safely across Europe? Did she really know better than hundreds of physicians prescribing thalidomide daily? Was she aware that her obstruction was denying American patients access to superior medication? The visits grew uncomfortable, with sales representatives barely concealing their frustration with this stubborn bureaucrat disrupting their carefully laid plans. Richardson Merrill escalated pressure by contacting Kelsey's supervisors at the FDA. Company executives suggested that an inexperienced medical officer was making unreasonable demands, delaying approval without scientific justification. They framed Kelsey as someone who didn't understand how modern drug regulation worked, who was applying obsolete standards to a product with established international success. The implication was clear. Someone more reasonable should review the application. Dr. Ralph Smith, Kelsey's immediate supervisor, faced a difficult position. Pharmaceutical companies were important stakeholders in FDA operations, and maintaining functional relationships mattered. Richardson Merrill was a respected company with legitimate business interests, yet when Smith reviewed Kelsey's concerns and examined the thalidomide data himself, he found her objections scientifically sound. The data really was inadequate. Smith backed Kelsey's position, telling company representatives that the application needed more work before approval could be considered. Kelsey also found crucial support at home. Fremont Kelsey, her husband and fellow pharmacologist, reviewed the thalidomide application in detail during evenings. He confirmed Francis's concerns about inadequate metabolism studies and peripheral neuritis reports. The couple discussed the application over dinner, analyzing Richardson Merrill's arguments and identifying weaknesses in the company's evidence. Fremont's scientific validation strengthened Francis's resolve when company pressure intensified. The pressure campaign reflected broader pharmaceutical industry culture. In 1960, drug companies expected cooperative relationships with FDA reviewers, viewing regulation as light oversight rather than rigorous gatekeeping. Applications were often approved quickly, sometimes within weeks. Companies that invested in product development expected reasonable returns on their investments, and FDA approval was considered routine for products already succeeding internationally. Kelsey's resistance was genuinely unusual for the era. Most FDA reviewers approached applications assuming drugs were likely safe unless clear evidence suggested otherwise. The burden of proof fell on reviewers to demonstrate problems, rather than on companies to prove safety conclusively. Kelsey reversed this dynamic, demanding that Richardson, Morell provide convincing evidence of safety before she would consider approval. Richardson and Morell tried different tactics as months passed without progress. They submitted new studies, revised their application, and brought in medical experts to argue their case. Nothing satisfied Kelsey's concerns. She continued identifying gaps in the data, requesting additional information, and refusing to approve the application. By mid-1961, the company was spending enormous resources trying to satisfy demands from a single medical officer who seemed impossibly difficult to please. Dr. Widukind Lenz answered his phone on a November evening in 1961. Listening to another pediatrician describe a disturbing case, a baby had been born in Hamburg with virtually no arms, just small flipper-like appendages extending from the shoulders. Lenz had been receiving similar calls for months, each describing infants with catastrophic limb malformations. The cases appeared across West Germany with increasing frequency, a medical mystery that pediatricians couldn't explain. The condition was called phocomelia, from Greek words meaning seal limb. In medical literature, phocomelia was extraordinarily rare, appearing perhaps once in several million births. Yet Lenz was now hearing about multiple cases monthly. The babies weren't just missing limbs. Many had deformed ears, damaged internal organs, and other severe abnormalities. Some died within hours of birth. Those who survived faced lives of profound disability, unable to perform basic tasks most people took for granted. Lenz began systematic investigation, interviewing mothers of affected babies and searching for common factors. The cases clustered geographically and temporally, suggesting environmental causes rather than genetic mutations. As Lenz collected data, a pattern emerged. Most mothers of affected babies had taken thalidomide during early pregnancy, often for morning sickness. The drug exposure typically occurred between the 4th and 8th weeks of pregnancy, precisely when fetal limbs were developing. Meanwhile, in Australia, Dr. William McBride was reaching similar conclusions. McBride, an obstetrician in Sydney, had delivered several babies with phocomelia and began investigating possible causes. He noticed that mothers of affected infants frequently mentioned taking Distaval, the Australian brand name for thalidomide. McBride wrote to the drug's manufacturer in December 1961, warning that thalidomide appeared to cause birth defects. The medical evidence became overwhelming quickly. In Germany alone, doctors identified thousands of babies born with thalidomide-related defects. The pattern was consistent. Mothers taking thalidomide during critical weeks of fetal development gave birth to severely malformed children. The timing of drug exposure determined which organs and limbs were affected. A woman taking thalidomide on day 35 of pregnancy might deliver a baby with ear malformations. Exposure on day 40 could cause missing arms. Day 45 might affect leg development. The pharmaceutical industry's response was denial and obfuscation. Chemie-Sulfanilamide initially refused to acknowledge any connection between thalidomide and birth defects, suggesting other causes for the malformations. Company representatives argued that the drug had been used safely for years, that millions of women had taken it without problems. They commissioned studies designed to exonerate thalidomide, funded friendly researchers, and attacked doctors who suggested the drug was dangerous. By late 1961, the evidence could no longer be dismissed. GR Pharmaceutical withdrew thalidomide from the German market in November 1961, though they still refused to admit the drug caused birth defects. Other countries began pulling thalidomide from pharmacy shelves as reports of malformed babies spread. Britain withdrew the drug in December 1961. Australia followed shortly after. Country after country banned thalidomide as the scope of the tragedy became clear. The final toll was staggering. Approximately 10,000 babies worldwide were born with thalidomide-related birth defects. Germany had the highest numbers, with over 5,000 affected children. Britain reported about 2,000 cases. Japan, where thalidomide was sold as a treatment for leprosy, saw around 1,000 affected births. Smaller numbers appeared in nearly every country where the drug had been marketed. Many affected babies died in infancy. Survivors faced lifelong disabilities, requiring extensive medical care and assistance with daily activities. France's Kelsey received the first reports of thalidomide birth defects in November 1961, just as European countries were beginning to withdraw the drug. She was sitting in her FDA office, reviewing yet another submission from Richardson Merrill, when her supervisor brought her a medical journal article describing the German cases. Kelsey read the article carefully. Her earlier concerns about placental barriers and inadequate safety data suddenly taking on terrifying significance. Richardson Merrill's response to the European reports was to intensify pressure on Kelsey rather than withdraw their application. Company representatives argued that the American formulation would be different, that their manufacturing processes were superior, that the German cases must have resulted from contamination or other factors unrelated to thalidomide itself. They submitted additional materials attempting to demonstrate that Kevidon, their brand name for American thalidomide, would be safer than European versions. Kelsey found these arguments scientifically absurd. Thalidomide was thalidomide, regardless of which company manufactured it or what brand name appeared on the bottle. The molecular structure remained identical across formulations. If the drug caused birth defects in Germany, it would cause identical defects in America. Manufacturing processes couldn't change fundamental teratogenic properties of a chemical compound. Through December 1962 and into early 1962, Kelsey continued rejecting Richardson Merrill's applications while European reports grew increasingly alarming. Each new submission from the company received the same response: inadequate data, insufficient safety evidence, concerns about peripheral neuritis and potential effects on fetal development. Richardson Merrill accused Kelsey of moving goalposts, of inventing new objections whenever they satisfied previous concerns. She remained unmoved. The pressure on Kelsey during this period was immense. Richardson Merrill had invested approximately $3 million in preparations for American launch, an enormous sum in 1962. The company was losing money daily while waiting for FDA approval. Sales representatives visited Kelsey's office weekly, sometimes multiple times per week, demanding explanations for continued delays. They brought lawyers, medical consultants, and company executives, all arguing that approval should be granted immediately. Behind the scenes, Kelsey was documenting everything meticulously. She kept detailed records of every interaction with Richardson Merrill, every phone call, every office visit, every piece of submitted data. Her files grew thick with correspondence, creating a paper trail that would later prove crucial when congressional investigators examined the case. Kelsey understood she was fighting not just for sound science, but for the integrity of the FDA approval process itself. By February 1962, the international evidence against thalidomide was overwhelming. Reports from multiple countries confirmed the connection between maternal drug use and infant birth defects. The medical literature was filling with case studies, epidemiological analyses, and clinical observations, all pointing to the same conclusion: thalidomide was a catastrophic teratogen, capable of causing severe malformations when taken during pregnancy. Richardson Merrill finally withdrew their application on the 8th of March, 1962, 18 months after first submitting it. The company released a statement suggesting the withdrawal was voluntary, motivated by European concerns, rather than any acknowledgement that Kelsey's objections had been valid. Internally, company executives were furious about the financial losses and angry at the FDA medical officer who had blocked their profitable drug. The application withdrawal should have ended the story, but a disturbing fact soon emerged. While waiting for FDA approval, Richardson Merrill had distributed approximately 2.5 million thalidomide tablets to over 1,000 American doctors as investigational samples for clinical trials. These trials were barely supervised, essentially marketing campaigns disguised as research. Doctors had given the tablets to thousands of patients, including pregnant women, with minimal documentation or follow-up. The FDA launched an emergency investigation in March 1962 to determine how many Americans had taken thalidomide and whether any babies had been harmed. Richardson Merrill's records of the investigational distribution were incomplete and disorganized. The company had shipped millions of tablets to physicians, but tracked neither which patients received them nor what happened afterward. Reconstructing the distribution network required months of intensive work. Investigators discovered that Richardson Merrill had treated investigational use as barely regulated marketing. The company told doctors the drug was safe and encouraged liberal distribution to patients. Many physicians gave thalidomide tablets to pregnant women experiencing morning sickness, exactly the use that had caused catastrophe overseas. Some doctors handed out samples without keeping any records, making it impossible to identify everyone exposed to the drug. The FDA eventually identified approximately 20,000 patients who had received Richardson Merrill's investigational thalidomide, including nearly 4,000 pregnant women. Emergency notification efforts attempted to contact every woman who might have taken the drug during pregnancy, warning them about potential risks to their babies. Many women learned about the danger only after delivering their children, discovering that the tablets their doctors had given them for morning sickness could have caused devastating malformations. American babies born with thalidomide-related defects began appearing as investigators traced the drug distribution. The final count identified 17 confirmed cases of babies with phocomelia and other characteristic thalidomide malformations. These children represented American families thrust into the same nightmare that thousands of European families were experiencing, their lives permanently altered by a drug that should never have been distributed. The number 17 was both tragic and miraculous. 17 American children bore lifelong consequences of thalidomide exposure, facing disabilities and challenges resulting from inadequate drug safety oversight. Yet those 17 cases represented a catastrophe narrowly avoided. Statistical projections suggested what would have happened if Kelsey had approved Richardson Merrill's application as the company expected. If thalidomide had been approved for American sale in late 1960 or early 1961, the drug would have been marketed aggressively to pregnant women for morning sickness. Richardson Merrill's marketing plans specifically targeted this demographic, identifying morning sickness treatment as a major profit opportunity. Approximately 4 million American women gave birth annually in the early 1960s, and perhaps half experienced morning sickness significant enough to seek medical treatment. Conservative estimates suggested that 10,000 to 20,000 American babies would have been born with thalidomide-related birth defects if the drug had received FDA approval. More aggressive marketing could have pushed that number higher. The United States could have faced its own generation of children with phocomelia, missing limbs, damaged organs, and shortened lives, all because one pharmaceutical company wanted to maximize profits from a sedative. The story might have remained an internal FDA matter, except for Morton Mintz, a Washington Post reporter investigating pharmaceutical industry practices. Mintz learned about Kelsey's role in blocking thalidomide and recognized the story's significance. His July 1962 article, "Heroine of FDA Keeps Bad Drug Off of Market," brought Kelsey's name to national attention for the first time. Mintz's reporting detailed how a single medical officer, working with minimal support and facing enormous pressure, had prevented an American thalidomide catastrophe. The article described Richardson Merrill's aggressive tactics, Kelsey's scientific concerns, and the ultimate vindication when European reports confirmed her suspicions. American readers learned that thousands of their children had been saved by a government scientist whose name they'd never heard. Senator Estes Kefauver had been investigating pharmaceutical industry practices since 1959, concerned about drug pricing, marketing tactics, and inadequate safety testing. His hearings had generated substantial evidence of industry problems, but struggled to build political momentum for regulatory reform. Pharmaceutical companies were powerful, wealthy, and politically connected. Reform legislation faced strong opposition from industry lobbyists and their congressional allies. The thalidomide tragedy transformed the political landscape overnight. Suddenly, abstract concerns about drug safety became viscerally real to American families. Parents looked at their healthy children and imagined the alternative timeline where thalidomide had been approved. The pharmaceutical industry's arguments about excessive regulation and bureaucratic delays rang hollow when weighed against images of limbless babies born across Europe. Kefauver's drug amendments moved swiftly through Congress in 1962, passing with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislation fundamentally restructured FDA authority over pharmaceutical approval, establishing requirements that remain cornerstones of drug regulation today. Companies would now need to prove both safety and efficacy before marketing new drugs. Clinical trials would require informed consent from participants. Pharmaceutical manufacturers would need to report adverse events promptly and maintain detailed records of drug distribution. The amendments also addressed the investigational drug loophole that Richardson Merrill had exploited. Companies could no longer distribute experimental drugs freely while claiming they were conducting research. Investigational use would require proper protocols, institutional review board approval, and genuine scientific objectives rather than disguised marketing. The FDA gained authority to stop clinical trials if safety concerns emerged. President Kennedy signed the Kefauver-Harris amendments into law on the 10th of October, 1962. During the ceremony, he announced that Frances Kelsey would receive the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service, one of the highest honors given to government employees. Kelsey became only the second woman to receive the award, joining a list dominated by military officers, diplomats, and senior government officials. The award ceremony took place at the White House on the 7th of August, 1962. Kelsey wore a simple dark dress, looking visibly uncomfortable with the attention as Kennedy praised her courage and scientific integrity. The president described how her refusal to compromise standards had saved thousands of American families from tragedy. Kelsey's response was characteristically modest, noting that she had simply done her job properly, and that any competent medical officer reviewing the data carefully should have reached similar conclusions. Media coverage of Kelsey's award brought her story to international attention. Newspapers across America featured her photograph and described her battle against Richardson Merrill. Magazine articles profiled her background, education, and career path. Kelsey became a symbol of scientific integrity standing against corporate pressure, proof that government regulation could protect public health when staffed by capable professionals committed to rigorous standards. The international impact of the Kefauver-Harris amendments extended far beyond American borders. Countries worldwide examined their own drug approval processes and implemented similar reforms. The United Kingdom strengthened its regulatory system. Canada revised its pharmaceutical oversight. European nations established more rigorous testing requirements. The thalidomide tragedy and America's narrow escape created global momentum for protecting patients from inadequately tested medications. Pharmaceutical industry practices changed substantially in response to the new regulations. Companies invested more heavily in proper clinical trials, established internal review processes, and improved safety monitoring. The days of rushing drugs to market based on minimal testing were over. Drug development became slower and more expensive, but also safer and more scientifically sound. Frances Kelsey continued working at the FDA until 2005, retiring at age 90 after 45 years of service. Throughout her career, She maintained the same methodical rigor that had saved a generation, training new medical officers and strengthening drug safety standards. When interviewed about thalidomide, she always deflected credit, insisting she had simply done her job properly. The estimated 10,000s to 20,000s American babies who were never born with devastating birth defects represent a particular kind of legacy. These are lives saved invisibly, families who never knew they had been in danger, children who grew up healthy because one scientist refused to compromise. They graduated from schools, built careers, married, and had children of their own. Their ordinary lives were made possible by extraordinary vigilance. France's Oldham Kelsey died on the 7th of August, 2015, at age 101. Her legacy endures in every drug that undergoes rigorous safety testing, in every clinical trial governed by ethical standards, in every medical officer who evaluates evidence over pressure. The principle she defended remains fundamental to pharmaceutical oversight worldwide. True heroism, she demonstrated, sometimes means standing alone against powerful interests armed only with expertise and the courage to say no.